thank you for coming. If you brave the cold today, I bet you share our passion at ABNY for the census. So you probably already know that the census count influences federal funding for dozens of programs that touch the lives of everyday New Yorkers: Medicaid, Medicare, affordable housing, education, Head Start, emergency preparedness, and infrastructure. And you know as New Yorkers that we pay more than our fair share for these to the federal government. In 2017, the state of New York sent an estimated $24.1 billion more in tax payments to Washington than we got back. Some might call that a tariff. Personally, I think it is clear that we definitely pay in more than we get back. Now, getting our rightful share is not always in our hands. On things like Gateway, our legislators have to fight with the administration and with Congress. But with the census, it's actually different. It is in our hands to be successful and thereby have New York receive our fair share of funding based upon an accurate set of data. But that's going to take a lot of work, and we have to do it together to make sure our fellow New Yorkers understand what's at stake, that the simple, seemingly uninspired act of filling out a census form has a practical and even an inspired impact on real lives of real people every single day. At the same time, we all have an obligation, a moral obligation, to make sure people who fill out the form, who simply tell the truth, are truly protected. ABNY stands ready to do our part, and before I introduce the newest member of our ABNY team, who's leading our efforts on the census, I'd like to say thank you to a few people. To Tony Marks and the New York Public Library for graciously hosting us, to our partners in government and former government officials who are here today, including Assemblywoman Neely Rosick, former Public Advocate Betsy Gottbaum, former City Council Speaker Chris Quinn, and Deputy Borough Presidents from Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan. I want to give my sincere thanks to all the people who are participating in the program today. To Quinnipiac and Mary Snow for conducting a poll to raise awareness for this issue. To Assemblymember Crespo, who deserves endless credit for being on this issue in Albany long before anyone else. To Joe Salvo, who is a treasure in our city. To Julie Menin, who is talented and tireless and driving this effort for our mayor. To City Council members Carlina Rivera and Carlos Menchaca, who are running the City Council's task force on the census. And finally, to two truly incredible and giving, selfless New Yorkers, Darren Walker and Carl Weisbrod. Thank you to all of you for what you do. Now, as the chair of ABNY, it is my privilege to introduce Melva M. Miller, who joined us at the end of last year to run our effort to help New York obtain a fair count. Melva is a lifelong organizer who most recently served as the Queens Deputy Borough President. Since joining ABNY, she has hit the ground running and inspired us with her enthusiasm, which is infectious, her wisdom, which is illuminating, and her work ethic, which is unrelenting. Please welcome Melva Miller.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning. Are we all awake and warm and ready to talk about census? All right. Well, I'm really excited to be here, and I'm even more excited to work with most of you in the room and some of you who aren't in the room around this really crucial effort and who are so committed to protecting New Yorkers and obtaining a fair count in 2020. While a recent decision to eliminate the citizenship question is encouraging, we know that the fight in the courts are far from over. New York already struggles to get its fair share from the federal government. And even with strong leadership in our congressional delegation, it's clear help is not on its way. But the good news is that we have a chance to control our own destiny. In 2010, New York City trailed the national average in collecting census information by 11%. By working together, we can do better. Government, community-based organizations, and the private sector. And the stakes are high, and we believe that this is an all-hands-on-deck effort. But all of our partners in the room should know, ABNY is all in on this issue. And to demonstrate how seriously we're taking this, Today, we are announcing the formation of our Census Organizing and Action Committee, something we are calling Census 2020 for a Better New York. And I'm proud to announce New York's distinguished leaders who will join Stephen, ABNY's distinguished chair, to co-lead this effort. Darren Walker, if he would stand, the president of Ford Foundation. And Carl Weisbord, senior advisor at HRNA Advisors and the former chairman of the New York City Planning Commission. Carl, please stand. Sorry. And you'll hear more from him a little later. Now, they will organize a committee of other influential New Yorkers from the nonprofit, healthcare, government, labor, business, and civic sectors working towards one goal: obtaining a more accurate count for New York. And I am so honored to be working with them. And if you could just look on the screen, I'd just like to acknowledge them. We actually have, I already mentioned, Carl Weisbord, Darren Walker, and Stephen Rubenstein, our co-chairs. Jennifer Jones-Austin, Steve Choi, Hector Figueroa, Sharon Greenberger, Patrick Gaspard, Hope Knight, I can't see, Bill Rudin, Michael Mogret, thank you, John Sylvan, Lori Slutsky, please stand. Hope Knight, please stand. Kathy Wild. And I can't read who's on the end. Oh, Dr. Stephen Corrin. Thank you so much for joining us for this very important effort. So we have a very informative program today. And I know you're all excited to hear all about Census because it's so exciting and it's so sexy. That's what we call it. Today, we're going to hear a poll about the census from the nationally recognized Quinnipiac University poll. We're going to hear from Julie Menin, the Director of Census for New York City and Executive Assistant Corporation Counsel for Strategic Advocacy. We'll hear from our city's Chief Demographer, Joe Salvo, who is no stranger to many in this room and a national treasure. And we will hear remarks from Council members Carlos Menchaca and Carolina Rivera, the newly announced co-chairs of the City Council Task Force for 2020 Census. But first, we get to hear from a true ally in our work towards an accurate count for New York, the chairman of the Legislative Task Force on Demographic Research and Reapportionment, Assemblyman Marcos Crespo. Assemblyman Crespo is the son of a Puerto Rican mother and an undocumented Peruvian immigrant father. He is the embodiment of the dream many immigrants have for their children when they come to New York. At only 28 years old, he was elected to the New York State Assembly, and he's been climbing the ladder in Albany ever since. In addition to his leadership on demographic research, he is the chair of the Assembly Puerto Rican Hispanic Task Force, a position he used to secure $20 million in anti-poverty funding for targeted communities across New York. Assemblyman Crespo is using his experience and ability to make sure those who come to New York are treated fairly and with dignity. He also serves as the chairman of the Assembly Task Force on New Americans, where he addresses major issues facing millions of immigrants that call New York their home. He used this perch to pass the most comprehensive anti-fraud measure in over 50 years to protect immigrants. And every day, he works on legislation to improve the quality of life for people in the Bronx, passing laws that include to protect children from carbon monoxide poisoning, provide loans to small landlords looking to improve their buildings and promote energy efficiency, and increase protections for victims of domestic violence. And that's just to scratch the surface. To Assemblyman Crespo, the citizenship question is no esoteric issue. It's real life. And perhaps no member in Albany knows more about the wants and needs of those who cross the world to come to New York than him. He's exactly who we need leading the census, and ABNY is proud to call him a friend. Please help me welcome Assemblyman Marco Crespo.
Buenos dias. Buenos dias. You've started on your path to a proper census count by speaking the language of those we got to reach. This is no pressure, by the way, on that introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I no longer serve as the chair of the Commission on Demographic Research and Reapportionment. In the Speaker's infinite wisdom, he found a much smarter and better looking Latino to do that. So my colleague, Robert Rodriguez, will now be chairing that effort. But you're right, I have been passionate about the importance of the census and what it means to our communities for some time. And early, a few years back, we started an effort to raise the alarm around what was going to happen with the census. We put forward a bill to create the 2020 Census Commission statewide, and we started to endeavor into ideas responding to some of the federal initiatives that we knew threatened a proper count in the state of New York. One of those ideas included investment into our library system. We believe that the libraries serve a crucial role in our communities and are one of those places where our immigrant community feels safe, going to, getting services, getting information, helping their kids with homework, and really spending time after work or after school. And so, and I'll mention it in a minute, when we talk about the federal government's reliance on technology, despite the fact that we still have a digital divide in our rural communities and low-income communities, I believe that our library system and our public school system can serve as a safe space to provide technology and access to those families who are going to be very afraid of somebody knocking on their door asking for their information, but may feel comfortable coming forward to these safe spaces to provide that help. And I want to thank all the representatives of the library system. They have been great partners and have expressed a tremendous interest in serving in that capacity and providing that space for New Yorkers. But let me go through a couple of thoughts. First of all, I know there was a prior breakfast, and I want to thank ABNY for hosting this and for launching this initiative. I know you guys already have gone over what is at stake. Billions of dollars in resources, as well as representation. On the resource side, we have had to endeavor at the state level to invest in anti-poverty measures and really make up for lost ground in federal funding that we have sorely needed. Communities across the state are suffering, and it's not just New York City. I represent the Bronx, but I care about the poverty rates in Rochester. I care about what's happening in Binghamton. I care about particularly neighborhoods that have seen an influx of new Americans as well as Puerto Ricans who are forced out of the island but are coming to these communities expecting a lower cost of living and only finding lack of opportunities. And that could have been resolved with better federal resources. We lost that opportunity when we had a severe undercount in 2010. We can't afford to make the same mistake. On political representation, we all know what we're dealing with. You know, the state of New York is a target of much of the federal administration's efforts. They view us as the problem or part of, enemies per se. They're undermining much of the needs of the state of New York. And we need a good delegation that can fight back, that has the voice to do that, that have the numbers to do that. And we are one of a handful of states that already we know we stand to lose up to 2 congressional seats if we don't get this count right. So this all threatens New York State's future, and we need to do something about it. And we also know the mistakes that were made in the past. At the last minute in 2010, the state put forward, $2 million into census outreach. And at the 11th hour, reached out to organizations on the ground who have those relationships and said, here's a couple $100,000, go out there and convince people to fill out the census. That's insufficient. That's a joke. And we can't make that mistake again. We're already setting ourselves up for failure if we don't act quickly. And I'm appreciative that last year we finally passed the 2020 Count Commission in our state budget. But unfortunately, we've already missed the first deadline. That commission should have met already, should have issued a report in January. We're now going to name the appointees and get the ball rolling. We don't have to wait for the commission's results. We know what the data will be. We know we need to put resources towards this, and we know who we need to rely on. And we don't have to recreate the wheel here. The fact is that we have a great network of nonprofit organizations, labor unions, partners on the ground, business community. Everybody has said presente to this effort. So let's just put the resources in their hands and let them do what they have to do. We're all celebrating the decision by the federal courts to take out the citizenship question. Now, we're not safe yet. That could always come back. But the damage of that has already been done. The impact that that has on the psyche of our immigrant communities is already done. And well before that question, whether that question was included or not, what happened with the DACA recipients and just the rhetoric and the enforcement by ICE in our schools and in our courts, all of this has already forced these communities back in the shadows. And we have a tremendous effort to undertake to shine a light and make them feel comfortable. So a couple of things that I think we need to do. First, I'm asking our congressional delegation to aggressively pursue legislation, and I realize, there aren't partners in the Senate at this point, but I think we need to send a loud message nationally that the information that is provided in the census is protected. Now, we know the law says that, but people don't trust that. So how do we do that? I believe that they should put legislation forward to create an affirmative defense for any deportation proceeding for anyone whose case relies on information improperly gathered from census data. Create an affirmative defense. If I'm an immigrant and they come after me with information they should never have had, I should be free of any deportation proceeding. That's the way we send the loud message to folks. Actually come forward. It might work in your benefit. At the state level, we know what the original proposal for the 2020 Census Commission called for, and please give me a sign when I'm talking too long. Our proposal involved one representative from every county in the state. I represent the city of New York. We know that while the city had some small population gains, the rest of the state saw tremendous population loss. But I mentioned poverty affects us all, and what happens in upstate New York affects us downstate. So we really need to look at each other's neighborhoods, and we're all in this together, Republicans and Democrats alike. And so I would hope we depoliticize this issue despite what the federal government is trying to do. We all need a proper count. We need to just put the resources in the hands of those local organizations, because we're not, as government, look, I have the credibility, I can talk about my immigrant background, but the minute I wear this suit and this pin to somebody in my neighborhood, there's a level of distrust. I represent government. Government has not been good to me. Government has made my cost of living difficult. Government has not provided enough resources. Government is the same reason I can't tell whether you're a city council member, state assemblyman, or congressional official, whether you know Trump, like him or not. You know what? You represent government, I don't like you. That's the sort of stage with which sometimes we're having this conversation. So it can't be me. But there are partners who have those relationships on the ground. There are community-based organizations who know the neighborhoods and know how to message to them. And that's where we need to put resources. We are going to support, we have a legislative ask to support the $40 million investment in this state budget to put the money in the hands of the community-based organizations. Let them do what they need to do. In fairness, as as disappointed as I am at the slow pace of moving along with the State Commission, I have reached out to the governor's office, and we've had some discussions around where resources exist today. There is a belief that there are already resources in EDC and a couple of other agencies that can be used for marketing and or outreach. I'm concerned that some of that is limited to more of the marketing side of things than the outreach side, and that's why we're going to fight for those $40 million. But we need it all. We need to somehow create a level of trust and understanding. And more importantly, it's not just the immigrant community. Most people are mobilized by, and we've seen this politically, how does this impact me? That's the question we have to really answer for everyone. Why is this important to me? And there isn't a New Yorker here, I don't care what your circumstances or background, who's not directly impacted by a proper count. And we have to find a way to make this personal to people. We saw a tremendous increase in voter turnout. I would like to say it's because I'm the chair of the Democratic Party in the Bronx and I made it happen. But the truth is, it is the agony, it is this sentiment that people are uneasy about what's happening in Washington in particular, and some of the rhetoric that's coming down and the impact that's having on them. So we need to tap into that same emotion, and we need to make people understand an improper count will lead to losses that will affect you directly. It will affect your children's access to services. It will affect seniors getting hot meals. It will affect homeless services. It will affect Medicaid service. It will affect every aspect of life in the city and in the state. And so we need to make this personable to people. And in order to do that, everybody has to be at the table, from our local businesses to our big businesses, to our partners in government, and as well, as I said, make it an investment in the community-based organizations that have that reach. So we have a lot of work to do. I know that there's a tremendous commitment from our speaker, as well as Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, to get this work done. We have to provide the funding and get out of the way and let this work get done. We made mistakes in 2010. Let's get it right in 2020. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Assemblyman Crespo. That was really inspiring and really important. I just have a couple of things to say. First and foremost, I would like to extend my condolences to our distinguished partner, Darren Walker, on his recent loss. And Darren, I know everyone in this room wishes you the best and for a sudden, unexpected, and tragic loss. So please accept our condolences. Second, I really want to wish the best and welcome Julie Menin and the amazing Joe Salvo, who really have to lead this effort on behalf of the city. Government is, as Assemblyman Crespo said, this is really has to be a civic effort that involves everybody, but it really does depend on government leading the effort and doing the job right. And I'm so thrilled that Julie has taken this on and that the amazing Joe Salvo, who is in fact not only a city treasurer but a national treasure, is working again on making sure that we get the very best count we can. And I'm so thrilled that Melvin Miller is leading this effort on our behalf. I want to say something that I think Assemblyman Crespo alluded to implicitly, if not explicitly, and that is what the census is all about, which is, it is indeed a count which is going to determine both representation and financial resources that flow into New York. But let's not forget that this is also a competition. It's a division of resources, not just an expansion of resources. And we're in a competition with states all across this country. I do a lot of work throughout the United States on a daily basis, and I can tell you that every state is gearing up for this in a big, big way, not just New York. And while there are ideological issues that Assemblyman Crespo alluded to and specifically mentioned, and for sure they are there, and the citizenship question is certainly one of them, when it comes to real money, those ideological differences are set aside, and whether there's an R in front of a senator's name or a D behind a senator's name, every single state is trying to get the very best count it can, because it's a pie that's being divided, not a pie that's being expanded, sadly, given the situation that we're in. And that's why we really have to do the very, very best we can. But my job here today is really just to introduce the Quinnipiac University poll. When I was growing up, polling was synonymous with Gallup. Today, polling is synonymous with Quinnipiac, really. And Quinnipiac has really become a household name now. For 3 decades, national media such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and their readers have come to trust the results of Quinnipiac. And over the years, the accolades have really poured in. In 2010, Nate Silver of the polling analysis website 538 ranked the Quinnipiac University poll as the most accurate among major polls conducting surveys in 2 states or more. Fans of local politics certainly took note of when City and State called the poll the standout performer of the crowded and complex 2013 Democratic primary for New York City mayor. I certainly remember that well. So while pollsters from both parties may try to spin results and obfuscate results, journalists, readers, and an informed public really look to Quinnipiac for the real deal. And so I am excited to find out more about New Yorkers' attitudes on the 2020 census from analyst Mary Snow. She's kept us informed and made us smarter as a reporter for CNN, Bloomberg, and WPIX, among others. And she continues to keep us in the know. So, Please let me welcome Mary on behalf of the Quinnipiac University poll to tell us what New Yorkers think. Welcome, Mary.
Carl, thank you very much for that warm introduction. And good morning, everyone. I have an overview of the findings and what the public knows about the census and how they feel about it. Conducting a poll on both knowledge and opinions of the census is a natural fit for the Quinnipiac University poll, given the importance of the census and getting an accurate count of the population. And New York City was our logical choice since Quinnipiac has been conducting public opinion research on issues like this one for more than 25 years. We wanted to find out what New Yorkers know about the census and what they think about plans to ask people whether or not they're citizens. More specifically, will it discourage people from filling out the survey? We're going to be putting up some screens in a moment, and as you'll see, the findings are broken down into subgroups such as age, gender, race, and political party. That's something we do in all of our polls. What's different about this survey is it includes a subgroup of people not born in the US. We didn't ask respondents about their immigration status. We wanted people to participate in the poll, and we didn't want people to hang up and not answer our poll questions. We did, however, want to hear from immigrants as they are linked to this issue. So we asked people whether or not they were born in the US. Now to start, on the most basic finding, 81% of New Yorkers say they've heard of the census. Now, while this number is typically pretty high for a poll question, it still leaves nearly 1 in 5 New Yorkers who haven't heard of the census at all. And that gap is particularly wide in certain subgroups. Take younger people. Only 68% said that they had heard of the census, compared to 90% among older New Yorkers. There were also racial and income gaps. 68% of Hispanic New Yorkers say they're familiar with the census, compared to 78% of Black New Yorkers and 95% of whites. Roughly 2/3 of people on the lower end of the income scale have heard of the census, compared to nearly 100% among those on the higher end. Disparities among age, race, and income are a common theme for many of our responses. For example, after we explained what the census was in broad terms, we asked people how likely it was that they'd participate. In the definite column, overall, just 64% of respondents say they or someone in their household will definitely fill out the census. Among Hispanic New Yorkers, it's only 50%. The gap is particularly striking among age groups. Less than half of the young people surveyed, 42%, answered definitely. Compare that to 82% of older people. Now, despite that, an overwhelming number of people do believe the census is important to both the country and local communities, and that's across the board. All subgroups register in the high 80s or 90s. Just 44%, though, think it will benefit them personally. And then there are questions that get at the trust factor. The question asked was whether people believe the Census Bureau would keep their information confidential. Only 49% said yes. 40% said no. 11% aren't sure. Then there are specific concerns about putting information online. People were asked if they filled out the census online, would they be concerned about the privacy and security of their personal information? 65% of respondents say they have concerns, and those numbers are similar across all subgroups. That could explain why 45% of respondents say they would most likely complete the census on a physical paper copy. That's a number that seems high given the fact that we live in a digital age, and 8 in 10 New Yorkers report having easy access to the internet. We also sought to find out if sources of information about the census influenced whether people participated, and it seems it does. 46% say they'd be more likely to participate if they heard about the census from local nonprofit organizations. That's followed by local libraries and local political leaders. Of our options, social media ranked the lowest. Finally, we asked about the plan to ask people whether or not they're American citizens. Overall, 49% think the question is a bad idea. And as you might imagine, The biggest difference is between political party identification. 66% of Republicans say adding the question is a good idea. 61% of Democrats say it's a bad idea. Now, our most direct question on this topic: would a citizenship question discourage you from participating in the census or not? 15% of New Yorkers say yes, they would be discouraged. The two subgroups with the highest response, 25% of Hispanics and 24% of immigrants say they would be discouraged from participating. While 15% overall say they would be discouraged, that number multiplies nearly threefold when New Yorkers were asked if they know someone who they think would be discouraged from participating. Overall, 44% say yes. An even higher number, 61%, think legal residents who are not citizens would be discouraged. Then the answer with an overwhelming agreement. 87% of New Yorkers think undocumented immigrants would be discouraged from participating in the census, and that is across the board in all subgroups. The bottom line, a clear majority of New Yorkers believe the citizenship question would result in fewer people participating, resulting in a less accurate count of the population. On behalf of the Quinnipiac University poll, I want to thank ABNY for suggesting to us that we conduct this poll and for agreeing to allow Quinnipiac University complete independence in conducting this poll, which was completed in December. And thanks to you for all of your interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was very interesting, those poll results. And I'm really pleased to see people continuing to come in this morning on this cold day to hear sort of, something that we've been working on for a very long time, but which is really important to not only the country, but specifically New York City. And as we just heard from Mary Snow, that, there is a lot at stake. So that leads me into our next speaker, Julie Menin. We are truly lucky to have her leading the city's census effort. If any of you know Julie, you know when she wants to get something done, she will get it done. So Julie will come to the stage, and she will provide some context around what's at stake for the next census. She's going to talk a little bit about the city's plan on how to address that, and then she will welcome Joe Salvo to the stage. Julie?
So first of all, I really want to thank Stephen and Melva and the whole team at ABNY who have really been sounding this drumbeat about the importance of the census for some time. And I really look forward to continuing to work with them. I want to thank my colleagues in government, Assemblymember Marcus Crespo, who I've had the honor of working with over the years, and thank you so much for your commitment to the census, and we really look forward to partnering very closely with the state. And then on the City Council side, City Council member Carlina Rivera and Carlos Monchacha, I really look forward to working with both of you as the co-chairs of the Census Committee. And then Darren Walker, of course, and Carl Weiss-Broad, look forward to working with you as well. So I'm thrilled to be in this new role. I technically officially start tomorrow, but I can assure you that we've been hitting the ground running. So let me first of all say a few words about these two new roles that the mayor has appointed me to. So I am the new Census Director of New York City. The mayor also appointed me as Executive Assistant Corporation Counsel at the Law Department. And I mention that because in that role, it's going to dovetail very closely with the work we're doing around the census. We're going to be looking at a number of lines of affirmative litigation, looking at voting rights, looking at gerrymandering, redistricting, as well as other ways that we might be taking on the Trump administration if they are taking actions that are hurting New Yorkers. So that really gets me into the role of the citizenship question. As you know, Judge Furman issued a phenomenal opinion. For those legal wonks out there, it is really, I couldn't get enough of the opinion. I thought it was really one of the best written opinions. And he struck down the citizenship question not on constitutional grounds, but as a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. And that's going to be really important because as the case goes up on appeal, he really laid forward a pathway for the court to look at. In terms of an update, the Department of Justice has asked that the case go directly to the Supreme Court, bypass the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, so we're waiting to hear if the Supreme Court is going to grant that. We look forward, we will remain, the city, a party plaintiff on this. this. We look forward to working very closely with the state AG's office and our other partners on the litigation. So what's at stake? So many of the speakers before me have really laid out what's at stake, so let me just add a few words. I mean, when you really think about it, our most core democratic principles are at stake. When you think about representation, it has been reported that if there is a severe undercount, we could lose 2 congressional seats statewide, but it really goes even farther than that. What we believe the citizenship question really is about is an attempt to defund blue progressive cities and to increase funding to red states. So really there could not be more at stake there, and ultimately to change the balance of the Electoral College. And we think it's very important in messaging that come across so people understand. The poll result was so interesting, Mary. Thank you so much for that. And I think when you look at the number of people who know about the census, they might have familiarity with the census, but they might not then know what really is at stake. Beyond congressional representation, obviously funding. The Assemblymember talked very eloquently about it. If you think about it, there are 300 federally funded programs that relate to the census. So everything from SNAP to WIC funding, public school funding, public housing, infrastructure, emergency preparedness, resiliency. There's really not an issue that New Yorkers care about that does not relate to the census. And that is the messaging that we really need to get across. I will say on a deeply personal note that this is very personal to me. I am the daughter of an immigrant. My mother came here as a Holocaust survivor. And I think as we work very closely with our immigrant communities, when we're a city of 38% immigrants, we need to make sure that these attempts to silence our immigrant communities via a citizenship question, which is entirely unlawful, will not stand. So we're going to work really, really hard in that regard. And then in terms of the timeline and what the city's efforts are, I don't need to tell all of you the timeline. I know you're very familiar with it. But certainly one of the things that we're going to be focused on is disseminating grants to community organizations. We deeply understand, and the polling obviously bears this out, that people want to hear from trusted community leaders, either faith-based leaders, community leaders, neighborhood organizations, people who have been on the ground for years and years doing vital work in the community. We recognize that, and so one of the things we are doing now is putting together a budget for the mayor that really reflects that reflects the important work that we know community organizations need to do, and then also work that we're going to do. We view the city's role almost as a central repository for information, so that for all the community groups that are going out and doing door knocking and outreach, we want to be able to know about that, so then we can feed that back into a central technology base, and we can really have a deep level grasp on what is going on in terms of the outreach efforts. In terms of the online question, we believe that has benefits and drawbacks. The benefits are that we get real-time data for the first time, so I know Joe is extremely excited about that, because that will really allow the city to be able to quickly see where are neighborhoods that are not responding, and then we can send in teams right away. The drawback, of course, is this is a new technology, and are people going to want to fill out their form online? And that is why one of the mechanisms we believe is going to be important to do is for us to create pop-up centers all over the city where people can come in. There'll be computer tablets there. There'll be trusted community partners there. And we can have leaders from around the city there really coming in and filling out the census on the spot. So that's something that we're looking at and we think is going to be very important. And then 2 other points I would make is we're going to be doing a really extensive mass media campaign with TV, radio, and print ads in community and ethnic papers. What is important about that is we want to do micro-targeted ads. We've really not seen that before, and I think it's so important. Every community has different issues, and we recognize that. And we need to really make sure that people understand what is at stake for issues that they deeply care about. So for parents, we want to make sure that they understand that Title I funds are at stake. The city receives approximately $770 million each year in Title I funds. These funds are at stake if there is an undercount. Another example is the city's health department depends on census data when there is a health emergency. So a number of years ago, there was a measles outbreak in Long Island City. The health department quickly looked at the census data, determined how many vaccines they needed based on the census data. So you can see the implications are so serious if there is an undercount and we don't have correct information. And then the last point I wanted to make is on confidentiality. The Assemblymember talked about it. So Title 13 of the U.S. Code does indeed protect the confidentiality of census. We need to get that messaging across because we don't want a situation where people don't recognize that. Title 13, and we've done a lot of legal research on this at the city's law department, is very strong and ironclad, and so we need to make sure that that messaging is getting across. So in closing, I am so excited to get started in these two new roles. I can't wait to work with all of you. We are completely open for ideas, suggestions, thoughts, and so myself and some members of my team will be here after to talk to you. Thank you so much. And then I have a great job. I get to introduce our partner, Joe Salvo. All of you know Joe, but it's really incredible his depth and wealth of knowledge he has on the census. We are so lucky that he has stayed on for his fourth census. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Joe Salvo. Thank you.
After all of those great comments, what can I offer you? Obviously, as you can see in the slide here, I'm going to echo what was said earlier about making the census personal. But let me say that the theme of what I'm going to talk about briefly today is about the concept of ownership. There is no disputing the fact, and it's been confirmed today, that the introduction of a citizenship question will result in a decline in self-response. Okay, and my participation in the litigation had to do with what happens when self-response goes down. What are the ramifications of that? Self-response is a critical feature of the census. Since 1970, when we started the mail-out, mail-back census in the United States, the main instrument for data collection has been through self-response. So what I want to say at the outset is that we want response, but we want self-response. And here's why. We have the potential to have a tremendous impact on self-response, on getting people to respond out of the gate, so to speak. And that will, to a great degree, determine the quality of the data and the quality of the count. Because we know, it's a fact, that self-response gives us better data, gives us a better count. Communities with high levels of self-response generally are communities that are counted better. Undercount increases in those communities that do not self-respond. And then there's the issue of non-response follow-up, or as demographers, as we call it, NRFU. There was a proposal once to sample in NRFU, and it was called SNRFU. It didn't go over well, especially at the Supreme Court. So we've got this situation where we have a great deal of potential control here of the actual enumeration. We have the ability to go ahead and to, frankly, cut the Census Bureau's workload in what we call NRFU. The main danger of a decline in self-response is that the burden on the Census Bureau in non-response follow-up can increase drastically. In the litigation, that was at least 5.8 percentage points. That would be the hit. But the judge pointed out rather accurately that that could swell dramatically because of the groups that are potentially at risk. And you heard that today about some of the groups that are obviously very nervous about the citizenship question. Now, this is an example of what happens when the Census Bureau goes ahead and has to execute the census in neighborhoods that have not where large communities have not self-responded. In non-response follow-up, the Census Bureau executes a whole bunch of operations. I don't want to sound harsh, but I want to say this. The census, I've said this before, is an engineering marvel. It is a machine with hundreds of operations. When the regional director of the Census Bureau starts that machine, it just goes. Those wheels start turning, there are operations, there are dates, all of it has to happen at a certain clip in order for it to be executed correctly. That can be a problem. And this is an example of a problem that occurred in 2010. This is a map of change in the number of vacant housing units between 2000 and 2010, last decade. The areas in deep red show 200, 300, 500% increases in vacant housing units. You don't think about vacant housing units when you think about Bay Ridge, Bensonhurst, Bath Beach, Gravesend, Manhattan Beach, or Astoria, Old Astoria, Steinway, as being bastions of vacancy increases last decade. The lion's share of it is erroneous. It is erroneous because the Census Bureau had to go out and had to look at the basements, look at the attics, look at the different configurations of housing that we have in this city that are very complicated. So, the knee-jerk is to blame the Census Bureau. We say, the Census Bureau did a lousy job, and it's true. In these areas, Census Bureau did not do a great job. But we are equally to blame, because if we had gotten those people out in 2010 to respond out of the gate, those basements would have been represented, and it never would have come to this. The Bureau wouldn't have had to go out and find people, because they would have responded on their own. So we have an opportunity through the outreach campaign to go ahead and to take ownership of self-response. That's my message. We need to take ownership of that so that people respond on their own. Now, as you've heard, it is amazing how few people, percentage-wise, in the Quinnipiac poll, understand the benefits of the census. They don't. We need to make it personal. We need to make sure people understand that when they go to that community center, that health center, that the benefits that they get may go away if the count is poor. What you saw in the poll was a bunch of people, 18 to 34, and people who were in, Hispanics. You saw the apprehension. There's a whole bunch of people who I would characterize as being on the fence. Those are the primary targets for outreach, because they could go either way. That 20, 30, or 40% of people who are probably going to answer, okay? We have to get them to answer. We have to describe to them what the benefits are. That's the target for the outreach. And as you heard Julie say, confidentiality. People, the Census Bureau's own research, as well as the Quinnipiac poll now, confirms that there are a lot of people out there who don't believe that the census is confidential. We need to fix that. And there are a number of people in the 20 or 30% range that say they would like assistance when the census comes. Right now, the Census Bureau has not planned on providing on-the-ground assistance, but I'm happy to say that there has been an effort, a targeted effort by stakeholders, which it looks like might result in dollars for the Census Bureau to establish on-the-ground questionnaire assistance. So, what are the outreach opportunities here? And what are Julie and I pursuing? We're talking about a neighborhood outreach model where you target particular neighborhoods and you look at the segments of people in those neighborhoods, much like you do in a marketing strategy. For example, it was pointed out that internet access may be an issue. There is a community here in New York City, a neighborhood, where 71% of the population that reported in the American Community Survey does not have an internet subscription. 71%. And that's something that we need to know, and we need to make sure the Census Bureau knows. We're going to leverage non-traditional data sources, social media, for example. But the key, I believe, will be that we will reach out to the entities within city government that provide people with services. It could be workforce training, it could be social services, health services, and use that network to not only educate people about the importance of the census, but get people to comply. And of course, if the Census Bureau doesn't provide on-the-ground questionnaire assistance, we will need to do that. So the message, I think, here is very clear, that all of us need to take responsibility for encouraging self-response. That is the cleanest, easiest, best way of ensuring an accurate census. If we manage to do that, if we manage to get people to respond out of the gate, then the door to all of those operations, which if you want to read in gory detail, Judge Furman should be knighted a demographer, by the way. The ruling is quite amazing if you haven't taken a look at it. In the ruling, he talks about the damages, the errors that come into play when response goes down and the Census Bureau needs to go ahead and to reach out to people to enumerate them. We know this time they're going to have fewer people in the field. We know that a lot of the testing that they've done has been deficient. There's a high degree of uncertainty, I believe, in some of the operations that they're going to put forth, especially regarding the use of things like postal service data and tax return data in many of our neighborhoods where people don't necessarily file a tax return, where addresses are not exactly easy to identify. So we need to watch that carefully. But the best safeguard is ensuring self-response. So we are committed, Julie and I are committed to doing that, to trying to encourage people out of the gate to self-respond. I thank all of you for listening, and we all need to get to work on this. Thank you.
Before we move on, I just would like to acknowledge all of the community-based organizations in New York City who have been working on this since day one, keeping us aware. Can we give them a round of applause? And as well as the coalition led by a New York Immigration Coalition and New York Counts 2020. And woohoo! We are behind you. We are working with the state to make sure, and thank you, Assemblyman Crespo, for that strong vote of confidence, that we get money for our community-based organizations that have the infrastructure, who are on the ground, who know the communities and the folks who need to do the outreach. We are behind you 1,000%. I'd also just like to acknowledge we have the Census Bureau here, the federal government. If you have any questions about creating a complete count committee, they are here. But next, before we open it up for a Q&A, I'd like to ask if Council members Carolina Rivera and Carlos Machaca, the co-chairs of the Task Force on Census 2020, if you can come up and say a few words about the work that you're doing.
Morning, everyone.
Buenos días.
So I just want to thank ABNY so much for inviting us to be a part of this. We are really, really excited to join this coalition, and for all of you who are doing great work, I'm so excited. I've actually already met with Julie Menin, even though she starts tomorrow. And to Quinnipiac, thank you so much. Quick note, I worked at the Marist poll, so second only to Quinnipiac. So we've heard a lot today about how important the census is and how divisive it has become, because there are people in Washington who are trying to make this a partisan effort to really, really break apart communities and really destroy the unity that we have been building as organizers. So you've already seen a lot of data today detailing the threat. This is $53 billion with a B, a year in federal funds for major programs like SNAP and Section 8. These are such critical programs, and so we are really, really dependent on a full and accurate count. And we have to thank the Speaker, of course, Speaker Johnson, for really giving us this opportunity to co-chair a task force. Carlos and I come from really interesting, diverse communities who happen to be right on the coast. So they are in jeopardy of resiliency dollars, of food dollars, of healthcare, education, and housing. And so we want to thank the speaker. I also have to thank the Manhattan Borough President, Gail Brewer. We went on a dry run to Rhode Island to see what that dress rehearsal, the one that we're getting here in this country, typically there are 4, but this is what we've been given. And they really had issues with language access. In a place as small as Providence, Rhode Island, when probably the second most language spoken there is Portuguese, could you imagine this city when there are over 100 languages spoken just at Elmhurst Hospital alone? So we have a lot of work to do, and our task force is going to take those lessons learned, and we're already beginning to meet with key community groups and elected leaders, and we learned so many lessons from the last time. It was estimated that almost about 1 million children were not counted in the last census. So it's becoming clear here in New York that we can't just rely on federal outreach funding, which is expected to be significantly lower than in past years to solve this challenge. So I want to commend Julie again for what you're doing, for taking this lead. To Joe, I mean, that presentation and some of the data that you presented to us at the City Council was so alarming. And the Quinnipiac data just really underlines and highlights how we need to get to work right away. We don't have a lot of time, and 2020 will be here before we know it. So beyond dollars, you've heard, we have to support community-based organizations. I started my career at a nonprofit right on Avenue B called Good Old Lower East Side, where people would come in and ask us for assistance, for benefits, for housing, and we did develop that trust. And the Assembly member is right. Sometimes they see us now, they're a little bit questionable, a little bit doubtful about us now being a part of an elected body. But you know, on the flip side, seniors still come up to me and ask me for help with their SNAP application. So if we are there, if we are visible, they know that they can trust us. And I will be on the ground, just like Carlos. We will be knocking on doors. We will be where we have to be to make sure that people see us and know that this is so, so critical. So we're going to try to re-engage these communities, right? We're going to be getting into some of the places that you didn't see. I believe when we saw that data, some of the most undercounted communities are the African-American communities, are the Hasidic Jewish communities. So we have to be there with local leaders, making sure that we are doing that right kind of outreach. So with individual council members, community-based organizations in the district, we're going to do the type of outreach that only those with a track record of work in their communities can accomplish. So I just want to say this is also very personal for me. I grew up in Section 8 housing to a single mom who depended on programs like WIC to feed me and my sister. So this is something that is so, so important for the working class people in New York City and our immigrant communities. And with those programs, my mother was able to start saving money for our future and making sure that, you know, this Puerto Rican girl from the Lower East Side would have the opportunity to be here in front of some of the most powerful people in New York City. So, and I can't thank ABNY enough for bringing us all together. There is a tremendous talent in this room, and I am excited to work with each and every one of you. So we're very, very excited to be a part of the coalition assembled here today, and I hope that my story and the story of so many others like me are going to encourage you to all to get to work as soon as possible. We're really excited, and I want to introduce the co-chair of the Census Task Force at the New York City Council, my friend and colleague, Carlos Menchaca.
Thank you. Thank you, hermana, and buenos dias to everyone here. You heard directly some powerful things today, not just from my co-chair, Carolina Rivera, but also the Assembly member. And what I want to really just underscore here and add are the fundamental roles that we play as legislative bodies, and that is of oversight, bringing transparency and accountability to this whole thing. There's no doubt that there's incredible leadership here at the city level. And what we want to ensure is that our communities understand what's going on in real time and how they can plug in. Our community organizations have been the force of nature on our ground. And all I have to do is point to the participatory budgeting phenomenon that has been a real hallmark for the city council. How many of you have voted in a PB election in your district? Raise your hand. Makes me feel so good. Awesome. Thank you.
We're on deck.
Thank you. That is a testament to the kind of work that we're doing already that wasn't alive in 2010. Those are the kind of relationships we're building, even with our young people, as young as middle school, who are voting and beginning to understand their voice. Status is no longer an issue in that kind of initiative because everyone can vote. Last year, 100,000 people voted in this citywide, in only a few districts, but we just passed a referendum on the city level to bring it citywide. This is what we need to bring together, and this is why we as the legislative body, the policymakers, because that's who we are. We deliver the policy to the executive to execute, and we're going to bring transparency, public hearings, discussions in our neighborhoods to ensure that that's happening and that the right resources go into our communities. And this is also, as Joe, I think, rightly said, this has to be personal. And all those mothers who are in our neighborhood, who are fighting for computer labs in their neighborhood schools or park improvements, it's personal to them. And they're seeing how important this is. I think we're going to be able to build on that in a very real way. Like Councilmember Rivera, this is also very personal for me, single mom, growing up in public housing, WIC and food stamps and healthcare were all part of our life. 7 brothers and sisters. This is real. And people are going hungry today. We got to get this right. We got to get this right. And we're going to get it right together. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out this morning and braving the cold. And stay tuned, more to come on Census. Thank you.